Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Valerie and I am the founder of Parker and Talia, which is a sensory-friendly lifestyle brand, which was really built from my own frustrations of being a parent to sensory-sensitive children. I basically could not find any clothing for them to wear, socks especially, so I just made my own, and the brand kind of went from there. So today I'm talking to Lindsay, and Lindsay is an autism and anxiety sleep coach. And I am so excited to have you here, Lindsay. I think everyone is going to find your information life-changing like I did. So thank you for being here.
No, no problem. Like, obviously, thank you for having me. I think it's a thing that a lot of people need help with, and there's not that many of us out there. So, it's something that definitely the support, there needs to be more of it, basically. So, my job is to help parents and spread the word and, give them as much help and support as possible because I know how difficult it is as well. Yeah, so I mean, my background is actually in teaching. I used to be a teacher for 20 years actually,
Wow.
and I've got two children of my own as well. And actually, I retrained to become a sleep consultant when I was on maternity leave,
Wow.
because I struggled so much with my own children's sleep. So I know what it's like when actually you haven't got the help, you don't really know what you're doing, and you're sleep deprived, and it feels horrendous. So if it's one less thing to worry about when you get help with it, if I can provide families with that, then that's a great thing. And the reason why I went into specializing in autism is because when I was working as a teacher, obviously I used to work with a lot of parents. I was deputy head for quite a while, and I used to work with parents of autistic children who would say they're just not sleeping, and obviously it would be, their schoolwork would be suffering, and I didn't have the expertise then to advise on that area.
Yeah.
I knew that there wasn't any support out there for them because the families were struggling. But also, when I did become a sleep consultant several years ago, I would have families contact me and say, my child has got suspected autism or is really anxious or is autistic, and can you help us? And I'd have to turn them away because I didn't have the specialist knowledge, and there wasn't people out there really to help them. There's only a few of us worldwide that specialize
Yeah.
in this. Um, so actually I got to a point where obviously that doesn't feel good, turning people away, or saying like, I can't help you, sorry. So I did try to retrained as an autism and anxiety specialist. That's where that comes from.
That is wonderful. I love that. And you are actually the first person I've ever met that specializes in this. And I think it's such an important thing. So thank you so much.
Oh, no problem.
And okay, so I guess we'll just get into some questions now. I love your Instagram page, by the way. I love all the little hot tips. And one of them you mentioned bedtime fading. What exactly is bedtime fading?
Yeah, so bedtime fading is basically a specialist technique, and it is used when bedtimes are late to help bring them earlier. So actually, this is a really, really common problem in autistic children, that they struggle going to sleep at night. Bedtime ends up being very late.
Mhm.
Um, and the technique involves actually keeping a child up later than usual so that they're more tired, more likely to fall asleep quickly, and then they get used to falling asleep more quickly, and then we can fade bedtime earlier, which is why it's called bedtime fading. And the technique itself, actually, to use the technique, you have to start by keeping a diary for a few days, a week or so would be good, so that you know exactly when your child is falling asleep. Once you know that time, what you do is you add sort of about 20 minutes to that, and that becomes your new temporary bedtime. So, for example, if you were putting your little one down at 7 o'clock at night, but they weren't actually falling asleep till about 8:30 every night, your new bedtime, or your new temporary bedtime, should I say, would be about 8:50 p.m. And the idea is that you need to make sure you've got a consistent bedtime routine. That's really, really important, particularly with autistic children, that things are very consistent. So have that consistent routine in place. Do it sort of 30 to 40 minutes before your new temporary bedtime. So for my example, you'd start around 8:10, 8:20, getting them ready for that bedtime at 8:50. If they go into their bed and they're not asleep within 20 minutes, what we do is get them up, go to another room, do something else, quiet activities, obviously nothing too kind of hectic that's really going to stimulate them, but for about an hour. So we want to make them tired enough that they get into the habit of falling asleep much quicker. So once you've had an hour of awake time, go back to bed and retry again. Once they have fallen asleep in 20 minutes for 2 nights, like 2 consecutive nights in a row, what we then do is move bedtime 15 minutes earlier. So the bedtime would become 8:35 in the example I used. And what you do is you gradually repeat that process until bedtime's where you want it to be, or until they're taking longer than 20 minutes to go to sleep, because that suggests that that's probably going to be their kind of natural bedtime then. And this technique does work in around 70% of cases for later bedtime. So it is very effective when studies have been done. But it does involve some planning, basically. So it's worth it in the long run.
Yeah, you know what? It's so interesting because I notice also on the weekends when we're out later and my daughter gets to bed late, she falls right asleep. So
Yeah.
that makes sense that that would be something that works. That's great
Yeah.
advice. Thank you so much. So you do have a group of videos called Sleep Hacks that I absolutely love. And one of them talks about some activities you can put into your bedtime routine. So what are some activities that parents could add that wouldn't overstimulate their children before bed?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've got the traditional kind of things like they need to do, like putting pajamas on, washing, and things like that. But the actual activities themselves in the lead up to bedtime really depend on an individual child's needs. For example, I'll just use my daughter as an example. It's obviously, so I do this day in, day out with her. She needs to have that burst of energy before bedtime. If I don't give her that and plan that in, we call it crazy time in our house. So basically, it involves jumping around, running from room to room. And I give her 5 minutes to do that before we do anything else as part of the bedtime routine. But I do call it part of the bedtime routine. Like we do that as a structured time when she goes upstairs. And my son joins in too. So it's a bit crazy, which is why it's called crazy time. And she needs that release of energy. Otherwise, I find that she will not comply with any of the other things I ask her to do.
Mhm.
So it is about putting in those things that actually they need and they enjoy doing, so that when you've got the steps in between that perhaps they don't like as much, like the teeth brushing and the things they might be a little bit more resistant to, shall we say, that they're more likely to comply because actually they know something else they like is coming later. So we kind of have the crazy time. If you're going to do if your child needs any kind of like bouncing, swinging, rocking,
Mhm.
rough play, anything like that, you can structure that in as part of the bedtime routine. I would suggest anything that is very physical
Mhm.
being one of the earlier steps. But also if your child has a sensory need where they do like to fidget, things like that, I would even plan that in, or they like to do a puzzle or some building blocks, something like that. It's just to take away that anxiety that often forms around bedtime, because when a child does struggle with going to sleep, it becomes like an anxiety thing, like, oh no, I've got to go to sleep, and there's that pressure, which we want to try and relieve by adding in these kind of nicer things that they like, basically, before they have to actually get into bed. So yeah, doing things like that. Like sometimes my little one, again, will do a little bit of drawing before she goes to bed. Like we have like a quieter thing she likes doing before she's actually expected to get into bed as well. So I would just suggest not having anything that's like very noisy, flashing, lots of lights, things like that, as not as part of the bedtime routine. But other activities like I've just mentioned are fine.
Oh, that sounds great. I think that so many people like myself tend to do like a story and brush your teeth, and still it doesn't really make the kids at all ready for bed. So
No.
I think something active will totally work for us too.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot of people out there that don't really know about sensory processing disorder, myself included, until I found something going on with my children. So can you just explain what a sensory seeker is versus sensory avoider, and is it possible for someone to have both?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a sensory seeker is somebody who has like strong preferences for certain things in relation to the senses. So, and actually, when they it could be to do with any of the senses, literally, like it could be to do with sound or touch or taste, anything like that. And actually, when they have those experiences that they like and they have the strong preferences for, it actually helps them to regulate. It helps them to stay focused and stay calmer. So actually, like, some little ones will spin and bounce, like that's their kind of the need that they have. Some little ones will like firm touch or pressure, and they might be heavily like to chew things or suck things as well, or the fidgeting, needing to fiddle with their hands. Some will make noises, or they like the feel of certain textures as well. And they need exposure, and they need to do those things in order to regulate and feel calm. So it's important to kind of plan those in. Sensory avoiders tend to find some sensory experiences very overwhelming or uncomfortable even. And that, obviously, if they're exposed to those things, and it can make them feel anxious and dysregulated. And obviously you can't eliminate everything, but it is worth exploring and knowing what might potentially trigger your child, or if you're a professional or child that you're working with. That children who are sensory avoiders, things we would see are like avoiding certain fabrics or certain foods, even like very picky eaters. They might not like messy play, don't like getting dirty, don't like touching this certain textures. May not like things like swings and movement, may be very sensitive to sound as well. That's very common. And some children will not like things like hair brushing, teeth brushing, which can obviously, when you need to do those things, especially like, they need to brush their hair and brush their teeth, don't they? Having those activities like we just talked about before and after can help ease the anxiety that comes with the toothbrushing or the hair brushing. So you're kind of trying to like balance out and eliminate those things. Autistic children in general tend to fall more heavily into one than the other, but actually they can have elements of both. So yes, you can be both. For example, like someone might really, really love movement and spinning and jumping and bouncing, but may also be a really picky eater. So they have that sensory seeking when it comes to movement, but the avoiding when it comes to the textures and food. But this is where it is important for sleep. It's important to think about these things when it comes to the sleep environment and where they're going to be sleeping, because actually they need to be able to fall asleep and relax there. So there's something they don't like in the room, or like a sound, or a smell, or something like that, it can obviously stop them falling asleep. So we need to take all those things into account. That's obviously what I do when I work with families. We explore all of these things.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for explaining that. I actually have one in one. My son is a seeker and my daughter's an avoider. So it's just very different. My son is on top of me all the time. My daughter, she's only 3. She hasn't let me kiss her in like a year. So it's interesting. I
Yeah.
know.
It's hard,
But
isn't it?
you also mentioned a sensory diet can help kids unwind before bedtime. What is a sensory diet?
Well, it's basically having like a bespoke, tailored plan that are going to meet your individual child's sensory needs. So the aim of it is to help a child feel calm, relaxed, and regulated. And the sensory diet is important, actually, that they have things planned in, like opportunities planned in throughout the day to bring them back down. So there's often it's difficult to explain, but when a child is autistic, there are lots of things that can cause anxiety during the day that perhaps we may not even think about or may not even realize. So what the aim is of the sensory diet, to each time bring down the anxiety a little bit. So the anxiety might go up, the sensory diet brings it back down again, so that by the end of the day they're not feeling really anxious, and actually they can switch off and go to bed. And the anxiety is kind of released. So yeah, like adding in like pushing and pulling activities, movement activities. If they're very tactile, planning in like time for them to play with Play-Doh or sand play, just like a 5 minutes here or there, will help alleviate some of that anxiety. Or listening to music if they do like sound. But actually making sure a child has those opportunities during the day. And obviously that means working closely with their childcare setting if they are in childcare or school. That can actually hugely help with their sleep too. It's not just about looking at like bedtime onwards or like bedtime routine onwards. What happens during the day plays a big part. Because that's often why autistic children do struggle with sleep, is because of things that have happened actually during the day, and there's an unmet sensory need or a build-up of that anxiety.
That's so interesting. I definitely did not think about that while my son's at school trying to give him
Mm.
things to regulate that way. It's very
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, so the last question is about melatonin, and it's obviously an opinion-based question. If any parent is thinking about using or not using melatonin, they should definitely consult their physician first. That being said, in your experience, do you think that there's a need in some instances for melatonin, or is it more of a band-aid to the core of sleep issues?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like you just said, I'm not a medical professional. I'm not, if you're thinking about giving a supplement to a child or considering using it, definitely go and speak to someone, obviously, who is qualified to do so. Um, what I can say is melatonin levels are lower in autistic children. So that means it is generally harder for them to fall asleep and stay asleep. And research has found that actually using melatonin supplements can help with this. It can help, particularly prolonged release melatonin, can help children fall asleep and stay asleep more easily. It doesn't work for everybody. It's, you have to look at dosage and things like that. Again, that's not something I do. But studies have found that actually it does help improve behavior as well. So if your child's experiencing challenging behavior, which often we know does happen, it can decrease that. And actually that's because the child is better rested.
Mhm.
No studies to date have shown that there are any like long-term implications or effects. Obviously, more research is needed. I have worked with families whose children have been on melatonin, and once we've put their individual plan in place and things are established, they have been able to wean off, which is incredible. So it's there are no hard studies, but actually, when I work with families, we look at the whole picture and everything. It can be that often they don't actually need it. So that's my experience of it anyway.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's all that we have for you today. Thank you so much for your time. And if anybody wants to find out more from Lindsay on sleep coaching, you can check out the link below. And also, she's on Instagram. What is your Instagram, Lindsay?
It is autism and anxiety sleep coach with little underscores
Okay, and
between
we'll give a
words.
link for that too. Okay. All right,
Perfect.
great. Thank you so much. It was great to talk to you today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course.